Good afternoon. No, you're gonna turn that on? Good afternoon. We're about to begin our annual Yom Kippur Symposium. So we invite you to take your seats. As with every year, we've invited 4 members of our congregation to share part of their Jewish journey with us. It's always a fascinating and uplifting time together. And so our speakers will be Betty Indick, Brad Kaufman, Melanie Lira, and Dr. Sergio Veroslov in that order. And we are especially happy to welcome our guest musicians for this afternoon, the ensemble, or part of the ensemble Agarita. And they've been with us at Temple before, and we're delighted to have them return. And just to note, on your handout that gives a little bio of all of our speakers on the back side of the page, there's also an introduction, a little bit about the choices, the musical choices that they have chosen for this afternoon. So without further ado, I'll call up Betty to begin our symposium.
I've often said that my connection to Judaism began when our son entered religious school in Galveston, Texas, with Rabbi Sam Stahl, nearly 50 years ago. When I was growing up, my family did not belong to a temple, nor did I have any religious training. But I realize now that my parents did instill in me a concept at the heart of Judaism, tikkun olam. As my father wrote, quote, he had the good fortune to be born to parents who were social do-gooders. They came to the United States with a background of struggle against terror, oppression, and discrimination, and they instilled in their children their ideals of social justice, unquote. He described a whole host of Jewish organizations in Los Angeles in the 1920s and 1930s, such as the Famine Scouts of America, the Workmen's Circle Shul, Young Pioneers, and the International Workers Order. My mom was a super organizer, even as a young woman. She was not allowed to walk across the stage at her high school graduation because of the work she had been doing with the ladies' garment workers. As my sister and I grew up, we knew of our parents' dedication to liberal causes, especially the American Jewish Congress. What my parents fought for in the early 20th century, such as welfare for the poor, unemployment insurance, and Social Security, rights they thought would always be available, are under attack again in this century. I remember being quite mortified when my first husband, Roger Schwartz, and I spoke to the rabbi before our marriage, and the rabbi looked right at Roger and asked, "You are aware you're marrying into a subversive family, aren't you?" Of course, he knew something about my family's political leanings, but that didn't stop us from getting married. The next phase of our life involved medical school in Guadalajara, an internship in St. John's, Newfoundland, and residency in Galveston before coming to San Antonio. Here, Roger was on the cutting edge of medicine when he and another anesthesiologist opened the first ambulatory surgical center in San Antonio. This has been my home since 1976, and I've been a member of Temple Beth-El for 46 years. Our son David was an avid religious school and Hebrew student, including being a tutor in high school to youngsters preparing for bar mitzvah. I soon realized that if I did not begin studying myself, I would be unable to answer questions my young son might ask. My route to education was our Temple sisterhood. I quickly made friends and absorbed organizational skills from the amazing women I worked with in this major hub of Temple. I mentioned in the beginning that my mom was respected for her organizational skills, but here at Temple, I was mentored by two other women of blessed memory, without whom I would never have grown into the offices I held. Betty Cohen was the first to encourage me to higher office. With her sweet smile and deep Southern accent, she would edit almost everything I wrote or spoke. But she delivered equal amounts of suggestions, not criticism, and praise in her living room. The hours I spent there only encouraged me to continue. Helen Jacobson was my second mentor and introduced me to the wider Jewish community, and eventually to the position of board chair at Roy Moss's Youth Alternatives, one of Helen's pet organizations. With the encouragement of these women and all those who I worked with alongside me, I served as president of our Temple Sisterhood, and as well as president of then District 22, made up of Texas and Oklahoma in those days, and also had the opportunity to serve on the board of directors of Reform Judaism, Women of Reform Judaism. What intrigued and frustrated me during those years was the fact that I could not read Hebrew. So when a group of women decided they wanted to study for B'nai Mitzvah, I joined in study with Barbie Gorlick-Callahan as our instructor. In June 1997, I had my bat mitzvah along with the 6 other women. It was a major accomplishment for me and something I'm extremely proud of. 10 years ago, Mel Endyke and I married. We had a whirlwind courtship after losing our spouses and hoped for many good years of married life together. Unfortunately, we both had medical issues within our first year of marriage, and sadly, these issues have continued for Mel. With the support of amazing families and a terrific caregivers, Mel has had the opportunity to enjoy watching his family grow, including the addition of twin great-grandchildren. During the challenge of Mel's illness, I have learned another value of Judaism, the importance of visiting the sick. Through these visits, I have found a sense of peace and contentment with this sweet, gentle man. I feel blessed to have been asked to speak this Yom Kippur afternoon and thank Rabbis Nathan and Jürgen for inviting me. Without this opportunity, I'm not sure I would have realized the impact Judaism has had on my life, fostering learning, leadership, and compassion. One final note, Lador Vador, from generation to generation. Just as our dad left a written record for my sister and me, I will pass this on to my son and daughter-in-law, Dave and Franny Schwartz, as well as their children, Carter and Olivia, as a record of my Jewish journey. May we all be sealed in the book of life. Gamar Hatima Tova.
Well, so the impact of Judaism on my life. I'll be honest with all of you. I am not used to talking about myself. I talk a lot in my regular life, a lot, but usually not about myself. I know normally if it wasn't a situation where I was on the bema and actually had to talk about myself, I'd find a way to deflect it and, ask that person a personal question and try to understand, hey, how can I find something interesting about them that they feel passionate about? I know for me, in taking a look at how anything impacts my life, I always try to silo, and this is just past habits. I've always tried to silo what's important to me personally and what career-wise. It's always kind of been one or the other. I know for my career, and I'm just negotiating, understanding value, finding a way to talk with someone and on behalf of someone other than myself. The successes in my career really tend to be other people's successes when you really look at it. I'm a commercial real estate brokerage. I meet a lot of people, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds per year. All walks of life, different backgrounds, different values, different thought processes, different things that are important. That career lens has always been tied to how I impact others, and that gauge of success by others makes it really hard when you actually have to take a look at yourself. And you can tell I've talked about other things other than how it's impacted so far. But, with a personal view, it's a lot more selfish. How Judaism affects you, it tends to be something a little more linear. At least for me, the personal view is milestone to milestone. Girlfriend, fiance, wife, dog, baby, house, that kind of stuff. That's how do you gauge impact when you're going item to item? It's hard. It's just not something that it's really easy to get a looking back perspective. And I like to think of myself younger, even if I feel very old at times. But it's really, you sometimes lose the forest for the trees when looking back and seeing how something affects you. As my years have gone forward, it's almost like I've tried to escape the impact of how Judaism's affected me, to be honest, unsuccessfully, and I've tried pretty hard. But I realize it's always been there. The moment it's hard to get that insight, and hindsight's always 20/20. And fortunately for me, this is kind of an opportunity for me to look back and understand how something, I may not have understood affected me. As I was younger, I'd feign indifference. The big thing for me was, someone lived in a city with a really low Jewish population, like San Antonio. People would ask questions like, the first question, usually, what is Judaism? A lot of people don't know. Second question is, what is Judaism to you? And my go-to was always an oversimplification. It teaches you morals and ethics, right? And it's a little unfair of an oversimplification. It's a part of a whole. It's pretty clear today that it was I would tell someone what they wanted to hear when talking about something that has impacted my life pretty heavily. But I'll tell you, for me, it really clicked, when my wife started taking conversion classes. And so, went through confirmation, bar mitzvah, Sunday school. You learn it all. You go in a different world. You work, and you forget a lot of the stuff that's come to you. For me, it was an opportunity, because I took the class with her, was to learn a lot of stuff that I'd forgotten. And for me, it was refreshing. It's knowing that, hey, I say that a lot. I always think that. It's the little things that kind of lay down deep inside that sometimes you forget about. When she ended up converting, I had the opportunity to reassess and really take stock of what that impact's been. And again, this may be very dated, correct me at a later time, but I've always remembered three pillars. One was God and Torah and Israel. Three things that kind of are a foundation for a lot. In my personal life, I've kind of realized the impact of Judaism on me is tied to three different pillars. It's faith, community, and the person. They all tie together at some degree, but, for me, faith, a lot of the time, and this is what I've realized is something that's always been there, was during times of adversity or hardship, but also times of hope. So, comfort in a dark time and comfort when you're unsure. Community, when you see the impact and the influence to help without asking in return. Something very hard to do is to help without intentions that are selfless. We talk about the person, it's when challenged to do something more for yourself or for someone else. Being grounded on earth, watching folks talk past a lot of the times and, maybe not take a look at who they are and do what's best. When you talk about how all that ties together, at least in thought process, you've got faith in the community, so how you deal with lives and death. Seeing people fall apart, come together, grow, learn. In times of hardship, that's really a lot of time where you see faith. And for me, when I see the impact of Judaism, we had our first daughter about a year ago, which was a wonderful gift, but within about 2 minutes, they put her in a cart, in a box, and take her off the NICU, which is a very hard moment. So I go with the baby to the NICU, trying to get a feel for everything would be okay. Walk back to the room. There's 9 nurses outside her room. And for the first time in my life, I closed my eyes, I said a prayer. I'm gonna keep what that is to myself, but it was something that impacted me. And clearly, she's okay. But you sometimes don't understand what faith is until it's tested. When you have a moment that was hard and you get past it. When you talk about faith in the person, it's pushing yourself to do more than you think you can do. I've seen people around me constantly fail and get some guidance, maybe tied to how they tie into the community, and do better. Learning to push yourself to do more and take a leap to accomplish it. Trust. It's faith. If not asked, I probably would not have put together what the impact of Judaism is on my life. It's pretty hard to look back and ask, why are you like you are? How did you get there? But I can confidently say that thanks to the community that helped build my faith in people. And really, that's what the impact of Judaism did for me. Thanks.
I just want to say that the musical introduction is pretty appropriate for my Jewish journey. It was quite intense and beautiful, and if it's anything of a foreshadow of my future, the calm ending is very, very well received. So I would like to thank the temple first and foremost for allowing me to share this experience. I pride myself on transparency, where I am in my life, what I've gone through, what I want to go through in the future. So this is just such a great opportunity for me to leave a bit of who I am here with the rest of you guys. And it's also such a amazing opportunity to go back and realize where I've come from making this decision about 17 years ago. So just keep in mind that I'm a pretty precise and straight to the point kind of person. So if it's short, I apologize in advance. But this is my Jewish journey. My Jewish journey began with a why God. At the age of 14, things weren't as simple as you would expect for a 14-year-old, one that I didn't really want to experience. It was a time in my life where myself and my family were experiencing a lot of struggles, a lot of financial instability, ripped family, addiction, and I found myself extremely isolated in this point of my life. Granted, at 14 years old, you don't have a very large circle of people to turn to, and most of those people are people of your age. Although in that time, not a lot of those people at my age were experiencing quite the same things that I was going through, which only added to that isolation, that wondering who you can turn to, who can you talk to about the things that you were questioning. And a lot of the times we question, why God, why? So I felt this void, I felt a disconnect and a borderline, almost atheistic approach to religion. When I sought answers to my why God questions, every solution presented just seemed too simple. Throughout this period, it seemed as if every knocked on door, every phone call, every conversation with an elder about my family struggles and what I was facing was going to be fixed with a simple solution. Just accept Jesus as your personal Lord and Savior. It was just that simple. Say a prayer, you got to mean it, of course, and all of a sudden, all of those things would flood in abundance. Finances would suddenly appear in the pockets of my family. Our family relationships that were torn would instantly be mended. Addiction would cease to exist, all by muttering some simple words. There was no other supplemental offering to this solution I found. It was just a magical phrase that required blind faith. And frankly, it bothered me. It didn't sit well, and it wouldn't sit well for a very long time. I began to question all the types of tolls that a simple phrase or advice like this could take on an individual who both took that advice and didn't take that advice. And as 14-year-olds do, I pushed back, and what that circle would later call defiance, which I'm okay with that now. How could something so major, so important, so valuable, be so simple? Because what in life is simple? Marriage, children, love, work, passion, checking the mail in the middle of Texas heat, sweat-free. Nothing in life is simple. So why should this have been any different? Therefore, the truth was, for me and my truth, this wasn't for me. This solution wasn't what I needed. And it would only reassure throughout the next 17 years of my life that exact pivotal moment where I decided that this did not feel right just would all come to make sense a few years later. So accepting any form of that religion or that solution into my life only complicated my life more than it already was, because I will say there was a moment where I felt that pressure to accept this as truth. But that defiance, that inner voice kicks in. I spoke forward and up and pushed back and continue to push back despite losing more than what I was gaining, continuing to add to that separation of family, no one quite understanding how someone of my age could be making such a major decision on something that they believed I didn't quite understand just yet. But who understands your relationship with religion or God better than yourself? And who are we to question anyone at any age when that decision can be made? It was a few years later, I met someone very special in my life who taught me that questioning everything excessively was actually not such a bad thing after all, and only made us braver and stronger, and more importantly, kinder. It was her who introduced me to the process of converting to Judaism. I was curious, I asked questions, more questions, follow-up questions, questions to my questions. And as I quickly learned, I became a sponge and absorbed this beautiful religion, which for me felt more of a culture, a daily way we live our lives, and not necessarily some checked box on an application or a quick, simple, easy prayer. Because if any of you guys ever converted, there's nothing simple about your conversion process. It is quite lengthy, it is scary, it's intimidating. Learning Hebrew, still cannot read it without the vowels. It is quite intense and not simple. But suddenly, everything quickly just began to make sense. The more I asked, the more I learned about this community where I could show up as myself, as who I already was, taken as I am, in a community that shared my core values and understood that God sometimes is a clockmaker, creates and steps aside, allowing us to make our decisions, allowing us to guide ourselves throughout this process, and allowing us to live our lives focused on the day-to-day and our mitzvot. I appreciated that value and that place of a woman in the Jewish faith. I was enriched by the lessons of female rabbis, in awe of seeing women in such a position of leadership and moral guidance. This was all very new to me. I was encouraged to no longer look at religion as a day-to-day and merely as an end goal, but rather an everyday step where that journey mattered more than what would happen in your afterlife. Because after all, who we are here is how we are remembered. I was encouraged to question everything further, which was a breath of fresh air. And most importantly, I was encouraged to question even myself. Especially during that conversion period, I was asked repeatedly, why us? Why Judaism? Why a group that's been so marginalized and ousted? And I remember the day of my conversion, looking at Cantor Berlin and telling her, because here it feels like home. Here I am seen, here I am heard. Here is where I belong. I'll never forget her face. She just smiled, didn't ask me anything else anymore, which I was very thankful for. Every day since that moment, that decision that I made at 17 years old, that started at 14, has proven to be exactly what I needed. Exactly what I needed to exist in this life. It's given me the supplemental abundance to carry me through the next 17 years of my life and what I will hope will be many, many more years from here. It allowed me to stay appreciative of the person that I was, loud, inquisitive, stubborn, giving, open-minded, and inclusive. Judaism has continued to enrich that in my life. It has never tried to change me, to mold me, to make anything overly simplistic. It has shaped how I've chosen who I love, who I choose to marry, how I choose to raise my children, how I go about my life as an advocate, the choices I make in my career, and more importantly, it's taught me how I engage with others in this community. Judaism is not simple. But here, in this place, in this faith, with this community. I know who I am, who I want to continue to be, but more importantly, I know that those two versions of myself, both present and future, will continue to find a home here without having to lose the core of who I am and the lens in which I view this world. Judaism has given me that, and for that, it will always remain an important part of my life's journey and the lens in which I'm continuously guided. Thank you.
Wow, that's an incredible walk-up music if you're a baseball fan. Thank you to Rabbis Nathan and Jurgen for giving me the opportunity to speak to our congregation. So a bit of housekeeping. I was born in San Jose, Costa Rica. I am the eldest of 4 children. My parents were born there as well, and my grandparents emigrated from Poland as a result of the hardships of being a second-class citizen, and obviously the rising anti-Semitism scene as Germany's hegemony was taking root. It's a common story. It's a story that many of us here share. It's a story when juxtaposed against many of our modern day inconveniences makes me take pause and wonder, would I have had the fortitude to uproot my life, go to a country that I didn't know the language, start a new career? But I digress. In 1964, my father, as a recent graduate from the medical school in Mexico City, brought us to the United States. We moved to Cleveland, where he began his internal medicine training. My 20-year-old mother, with rudimentary language skills, oversaw creating a Jewish home for her husband and 6-month-old Sergio. 1966, my sister was born. My father, a green card holder, promptly gets drafted. This unplanned wrinkle introduces us to Texas. First to San Antonio for 6 months, then El Paso at Fort Bliss. In his 2-year enlistment, he gets in year 2 of his enlistment, he gets deployed to Vietnam. My mother moves my sister and I back to Costa Rica, where we lived with my grandparents. When he was discharged, we kind of fell in love with Texas, the culture, the language, and he continued his training in Houston. It was also a little bit warmer. In Houston, my Jewish life really, truly commenced. I attended Beth Yeshurun for preschool and elementary school. We always celebrated Friday nights as a sacred time for our family. 2 more siblings and a new career opportunity move us to Dallas. There in Dallas, I attended Akiba Academy as an Orthodox day school. I completed my secondary educations at the St. Mark's School of Texas, which, as many people know, had a lot of Jews in it. I attended religious school at Shereth Israel. I was bar mitzvahed. I was confirmed. I went to the teen tour with the JCC. I went to the University of Texas. I joined a Jewish fraternity, yada, yada, yada. It was like what most people see as living in Texas, being a Jewish young man, really is all about. We ended up moving to Atlanta to complete our training, and after the Olympics, that brought us back to Texas. We moved to San Antonio in 1996. We began our careers and began to raise a family. I'll tell you, these upheavals and relocations never really felt disruptive. We never were alone. We had Shabbat dinners, holidays, life cycle events, and it was all really possible because of our larger community. It was our connection with fellow Jews and the Jewish institutions that were created before we were ever there that allowed us to have this transition. It felt smooth, not bumpy. Our cultural and religious similarities overcame barriers such as unfamiliar language and unfamiliar culture, like barbecue, right? Our Judaism is what sustained and nurtured us. But I also would like to share with you my Jewish identity was never in doubt. I knew who I was. I was proud of the accomplishments that my family had attained. I was proud when Jews won Nobel Prizes or political offices. I was entertained by Jews on the movie screens, now that there's no more screens, or in music. I relished the successes of Israel. I felt connected. However, I also like to share that my Jewishness was equally defined by the tragedy of the Holocaust, as well as countless examples taught to us, witnessed by everyone in this room, regarding the world as a hostile environment towards Jews. This perception may be distrustful of the secular world. It led to a feeling of defensiveness when it came to my Judaism, for these thoughts negated all the positive attributes of my Jewish upbringing. I could not dispel the thoughts that I was a perpetual underdog. I was always locked in a never-ending battle against those that sought out our destruction. I was always fighting off Nazis and Klansmen, bigots on the ball field and at school. My Jewishness was being defined by those that were against me. This despite being raised in a loving household who valued its Jewishness. The forced migration of my parents, the Holocaust, the never wavering fact that we were a minority in every sense of the word. Frankly, being Jewish felt reactive. Defending myself against a world that didn't particularly feel welcoming was erosive towards my Judaism. I began to find my Jewish self as an anti-Semite. Judaism felt more like a burden, more like a yellow star. It really became exhausting. Much of this came to a head when I married Alice, a Jew by choice. She didn't start her life inside the Jewish world, but chose to enter its walls. My family perceived this as a betrayal, as a breach, another example of the burden that Judaism had become. I recall weeping at the mikveh, worried that I'd brought her into danger after her conversion. So yes, a fair amount of turmoil, a paradoxical thought was running through my head. But things changed. I changed. My freshly minted Jewish wife sorry, I'm looking at you. Didn't carry this baggage. She saw the positiveness in her conversion, despite a less than gracious interaction with my parents. She and I had become involved with Federation, and through this avenue, a more positive, a more active Jewish paradigm emerged. Federation's Young Jewish Leadership, or cabinet, allowed me to meet Jews from around the country and around the world. Mission trips that took me back to Israel, around the globe, interacting with Jewish communities in the diaspora morphed my internal Jewish compass. One from a defensive one to a much more positive one, to a constructive one. I grew. I no longer saw the world through a victim's lens. The prompt for the Yom Kippur Symposium is the impact of Judaism on my life. I would answer that Judaism has allowed me to see the world through a different lens, a more positive one where actions can offer hope in a world that can be harsh and unkind. Tikkun olam, repairing the world. The idea that the world is not perfect but requires humans to address it is a wholly Jewish perspective. Conveniently, as an orthopedic surgeon, repairing is what I do. I have to acknowledge that my desire to help others and repair what is broken is a manifestation of my Jewishness. It is an uplifting obligation, giving purpose to my actions. It has allowed my prior defensive Jewish world to morph, to change, to one with more proper balance and perspective. Thank you, and Gemar Hatima Tova.
May we be inspired by our Jewish journeys each and every day. May we be moved by Tikkun Olam, connection to family ideals, love found in community friendships, and importance of visiting the sick. May we remember the true impact of Judaism during difficult times and times of hope, and find our foundation in God, Torah, and Israel, faith, community, and person. May Judaism answer our why and encourage even more questions, allowing us to discover ourselves and a relationship with God. May we be in awe of our ancestors' journey and be grounded in our Judaism and community, no matter where we live. May we enrich our lives with education, rituals, health, peace, tikkun olam, and community. Ken Yehi Ratzon. May this be God's will. We will see you at 2:30 for the afternoon service.